Hey guys, before we get going, Chance made an oopsie and he's going to explain it real quick just so you have a little more knowledge going into this podcast.
So when I speak about a certain plant called a Java fern, what I'm referring to is actually an Anubis plant. Anubis plant's really thin stalks, really nice big leaves. Sorry about that. Just messed up with my words, and there's a big part about me explaining about the Java fern.
So Java fern equals Anubis. Just going through this podcast, remember that. Welcome to episode 1 of the Tankers. Today we're going to be talking about aquatics, freshwater plants. So do you all just want to give a quick overview about maybe why you all wanted to talk about this today?
Well, planted tanks are kind of a step up from just like regular fish tanks, just like fish and decor and stuff. If you go into planted tanks, it's usually like you want to have more of a naturalistic feel, and I've always thought that's really cool, and that's usually what I do with my tanks.
Yeah, and basically the next step up of just going out and buying your fish tank is like getting aquatic plants, because it's also good for your fish and it's just good for aesthetics of your tank. So today we were basically going to be going over a few tips and tricks for keeping aquatic plant life alive in your tank.
So for me, I got a fish tank when I was in high school, and I was freshwater, and I got some plants, and they all ended up dying and just being eaten by my fish, even though I fed my fish what I was told to by the guy working at the store. So if someone did run into an issue like that, what would you kind of suggest, or what do you think I did wrong? I don't remember any names. That probably doesn't help, but...
So with freshwater planted tanks, what you always want to do is you want to make sure that the fish you get don't usually eat plants. I had a big 55-gallon like Amazon planted tank, and I like grouped all these animals from the Amazon, but I missed one little thing on silver dollar tetras, and that they eat live plants. So like over $100 worth of plants were just like destroyed and mangled by them. But you also you can't just plant most of the plants in like regular gravel and stuff. Usually you want to have a substrate of a soil-like balance. Usually Petco has planted substrate for you to start your tanks, and that's usually the first step in having a planted tank or the first 2 steps is making sure your fish won't eat them, and then having substrate for them.
Yeah. I think the substrate that both Chance and I have been using lately is called Eco Complete. It comes in like a 20-pound bag. It's, I think, made up of like nitrogen, phosphorus, all these different nutrients and everything. But when you put it in there, you can't put just like 1 inch of substrate in there. You have to put like 3 to 4 inches even, just so your plants have enough room to, sprout out their roots and absorb the nutrients.
So what fish tanks do I have right now that have some freshwater plants in it?
Both of our tanks. So I have a 14-gallon cube right now and a 15-gallon tall aquarium. In the cube, it's a heavily planted aquarium. So what I do for that is I have the substrate. I have a decently high light. It's like a clip LED light that helps grow them well. In there I have... Let's see. I have moss balls. I have Japan, which is a spreading kind of plant, really like small and spreads around. I have moss. I have Amazon swords, and I have big Java ferns in there. And so what I usually do with that tank is I have the light on between 8 and 10 hours a day. Sometimes it varies a little bit, but I also use fertilizer. It's an all-in-one fertilizer from Aquarium Co-op. It's some really good stuff. If you want to get into fertilizing your plants, which really helps them with getting all those nutrients they need, I would go for the all-in-one kind of pumps, having to measure out dosages for multiple things. Those packages usually kind of suck and don't have all the nutrients that you need. The all-in-ones will do everything you want. You just take a few pumps a week, and it's the simplest thing to do. Zach?
I also have a 14-gallon cube tank planted. I do the same kind of pumps as what Chance does. I have about 2 inches to 3 inches maybe in some areas of the substrate soil. And also one thing that I have tried lately was CO2 injection, which is something that I don't think Chance or I have tried in the past.
Yeah.
But basically, is you buy a CO2 cartridge and then you get a bubble counter, and you can adjust the CO2 levels that get fed into your tank via a tube and a diffuser, and it really gives a lot of CO2, which aquatic plants are used to can't think of the word. Photosynthesize. There we go. And ever since I actually started using that, I've had on some of my plants up to like a ½ inch every 2 days on those plants. So it seems like it's really helping a lot. And it only costed me like $50 for the whole setup. So it's actually quite affordable.
Yeah, I've had friends that have done CO2 injections, and I've seen like small tanks like that. I've just never really done it myself. An issue with CO2 tanks is as long as you don't overdose your tanks, you should be fine. But making sure your fish are still getting enough oxygen. Usually turn it off at night, right?
Yep. Yeah. You also turn it off at night when your plants aren't photosynthesizing
Yeah,
anymore.
because otherwise you'll just have a bunch of injection of CO2 into the tank, and then all the fish won't be able to breathe.
Yeah, if you start seeing fish congregating at the top of your water column,
gasping,
you're probably should kill off the CO2 for a little while. You could also get these little CO2 indicators on Amazon. Actually, you put a little bit of solution in it, and it just kind of rests on the top of your water column, and it changes colors depending on what your CO2 is in the water column. So I believe if it's green, it's good. If it's blue, it's too low, and if it's yellow, it's too high, because yellow, it turns acidic in the water column, and that's what makes it turn yellow.
And the best thing is about those is they're not too obtrusive, or they'll take away from the aesthetic of your tank. They actually look kind of cool.
They do.
They're kind of slick little pieces of
I
glass.
just ordered one yesterday.
Yeah.
So would you suggest, if you decide to do CO2 injections or anything with anything with CO2, to get one of those just to make sure that your levels are appropriate?
Be extremely helpful. I didn't have one right away, so basically what I did is I put it where it's low enough where I know it's not getting as much CO2 as it could be. So, but it's, a little bit is better than nothing for now until I get my indicator.
Yeah, rather be safe than sorry. You spend all this money on these fish and stuff too, and they are living creatures. So you don't want to CO2 them to death, which would be an awful way to go.
Correct.
But you don't always have to go that far with planted tanks. I've had plenty of planted tanks that I haven't used fertilizer in. I would always go with the substrate for sure. But I've had plenty of tanks where I haven't used fertilizer or CO2 injection and stuff too, and they've still done well. Usually that's the easier to care for plants that are going to grow really fast and really easy.
So if you want to get into freshwater plant tank, what would kind of the first steps you'd suggest for a beginner to do?
So I would get the substrate off the bat. Make sure you have a decent light. Have a decent little spectrum. The LED lights usually always really work really well for that. And then I would go with some basic plants like Anubis,
Java
fern. That stuff in my other tank, I can't remember what it is. Wisteria grows pretty well. Amazon swords, those grow pretty well. If you want them to get big and plump and stuff, you're gonna have to use fertilizer. But then that goes into your plant's growing too fast, and so you have to eventually kind of prune them back and make it look a little bit better than wildness.
So when I got that tank initially with the plants in it, we didn't have a light for it. We just put it in front of a window. Is that an option maybe? If you have a spot for your tank that's right in front of a window instead of getting an LED light?
I think for low light plants, it would be okay. But making sure you have a constant sun source, especially for those plants underwater and they're producing oxygen for your fish, you want them to be photosynthesizing as much as they can.
Yeah, the only situation I could see that working is if it was in front of a big paned window, because you don't have light that comes through that window only maybe 5 hours a day, and these plants should be getting at least 8 hours. So that just among itself, you're starting to stifle them out a little bit just from the start. So I definitely would recommend some kind of LED light.
And then as far as you did mention, if eventually plants could grow too big, or you could do something they grow too fast and you have to prune them back, would you be able to get maybe one fish that eats live plants to kind of save you some effort, or would you just completely avoid fish that eat live plants, especially for beginners?
And so most fish are dumb. And so most fish, when they see food, they'll eat it. So when I had my tetras, it's like they never stopped eating plants, like they'd stop here and there, but like they were eating them every day. And if your like plants can't grow that fast, that fish is going to tear them apart, make them not look good. I mean, it's up to you really if you want to do that, but in my experience, most likely no, if you want your plants to look good.
Actually, one of the benefits of pruning your plants once they get too large is you can use those and put them in other tanks and they'll start to grow. So you can just avoid going to the store and buying stuff and just start cultivating your own plants.
Yeah, like my Java fern, on the tips of its leaves starts growing off more shoots. If I cut those off and replant them, they'll grow into more Java ferns, as well as a lot of aquatic plants. You don't even have to they don't even have to have their roots intact. You can literally snap them in half and they'll grow on their own. The plant I have, my 15-gallon, you can just grow right then and there. You can just break it apart and grow it. It can float. It can be planted. It can do whatever. It's like one of the most hardy plants I've ever had, but I can't remember what it is. I think it's wisteria, but I'm not sure.
All right, so what wisteria maybe? What would be some good beginner plants for people who want a plant that is pretty sturdy, pretty hardy, not necessarily going to die super easy?
Java ferns are probably some of the hardiest plants I know. Java ferns and Anubis are the two. Big tall stalks. Oh, the Anubis has big tall stalks, broad leaves. Java ferns are usually more compact, broad green leaves. Really nice contrast in the tank.
And if you like something that's a top water, surface plant, duckweed. You'll hate it because it'll grow too fast in your tank, but it'll make you feel good that you're growing plants.
Yeah.
And it looks really cool, actually.
It does look really cool. The thing is, it grows almost exponentially because it splits every day or two. And so once it just starts blooming in a bloom, all you got to do is take a net and go through it and then just kind of dump them out. And actually, if you dry the duckweed out, you can feed them to Platies.
We are going to do it because right now in my little 5-gallon tank, I have a few Platies in there. So Zach has a bit of a duckweed issue in one of his tanks. So I think today or tomorrow we're going to be trying that out to see how that goes.
Yeah, we'll have to keep the podcast posted to see if they like it or not.
You love and you hate the duckweed.
Would you have any suggested beginner fish necessarily to go along with the plants?
It all really depends on the size of the tank, in all honesty. If you have, a 55-gallon tank, you could go with a discus tank, which I always thought looked amazing. That's not really a beginner fish, but...
No. They're expensive.
But usually probably like Danios, your tetras, maybe guppies, all kind of easier. I have zebrafish in my 40-gallon planted tank, and I've had them for probably like two years now. I think I've had maybe one death. They're all plump and wanting to lay eggs. I just don't provide them the conditions necessary.
So would Platies be a good one too? Maybe if you wanted to go with some duckweed, add some Platies, maybe keep the duckweed down.
Yeah, I think Platies would work well in a situation like that. I have 2 Platies in my other planted tank right now, and they like the plants and the foliage to go through. Platies are good ones for that. Mollies, swords. Those are really cool. I have a male in my tank. He's got a really nice long tail. Looks really pretty. Looks like a little red marlin. It's a pretty neat fish.
Swords do look amazing. You gotta look those up.
Yeah. Redwag swords.
Is there any other suggestions you'd think, or maybe issues that you've run into that you'd want to warn other people about who want to get into some freshwater plants?
Yes. Hair algae is an issue. So hair algae is an algae that grows on plants and wood and has really long wispy. And some people like that look, but eventually can get out of control. So you want to probably get auto Clinctus. They're usually called auto catfish. They're little algae eaters that'll eat algae off your leaves. And they're nice little cleaner fish for planted tanks.
And they'll keep the hair algae away?
Most of the time. Sometimes they get a little lazy.
Is there any big issues you've run into, Zach? The biggest issue you've run into, maybe?
I guess a huge tip would be if once you buy your substrate, look at the packaging, and if it doesn't say, don't rinse this, rinse it. and rinse it well. Otherwise, there's going to be a ton of little particles in there that's going to go in your tank, and it's going to take you forever to get your tank cleared and like bring up the water quality again. I know Chance, my buddy over here, had that problem. 3 days. And he ended up just taking out all the soil completely because it was just a pain.
And I put in new soil. Yeah.
Yep.
Did not like that soil. Kicked a bunch of dirt up into the water column, so my tank just like didn't even have clear water. So I was like, screw it, and I went and bought a new bag of substrate, different one than I used before, and it worked a lot better.
Yeah, so be sure to just put all your substrate like in a bucket and pour water in there and just turn it over and pour out the water and rinse and repeat pretty much until it's clear water.
Unless you get the Eco Complete that Zach and I get, you don't rinse that stuff because it's already got bacteria in it to help and a lot of like nutrients. So chlorine in the water could help or could take away that stuff for the fish and the plants.
So one thing that I've seen kind of in your all's tanks is that you all have driftwood. Do you need driftwood to grow plants? Are there plants that have to have driftwood to grow? Or is it just something that you like the visual, the aesthetic of?
We have plecos in our tank, and one of the necessary diet that they feed on is plant or wood matter. So if you want plecos and you want them to live long and have a nice life, you have to have driftwood in your tank, and I think it just looks aesthetically pleasing to me.
Yeah. Most different types of plecos will need that driftwood, and you can get all sorts of varieties. They're a nice ornamental fish too. Don't get common plecos unless you have a really big
buy
tank.
common plecos.
Yeah, they get huge. They get like 2 feet long. You need a big tank for those guys. Zach and I both have like little baby bristlenose plecos that we're raising, but
Mine's
on the
bigger.
other side, the driftwood is a really good aesthetic, and you can also tie plants to driftwood. A big one that people usually do is Java fern. Java fern you can tie it with like a fishing line after a while, and after a few months or so, you can take that fishing line off, and the Java fern will have grown its roots into the driftwood, so it becomes part of the wood and becomes part of the whole piece itself, so it looks really natural, looks really nice, and it's also nice shelter for your fish to kind of get away. I know my driftwood has like a cave in it, and then the ones in my 15 have little holes and stuff in them because I have bumblebee catfish that like to put themselves in that piece of driftwood too and hide.
So for Java fern, could you just have driftwood and Java fern without having to get the proper substrate soil?
Yeah, actually Java fern grows like that. It'll stay there and be like kind of cool looking, but if you want it to grow bigger, you're gonna have to fertilize with something for a Java fern to grow to larger sizes. They're kind of a slower growing plant unless in like extreme optimal conditions.
So for Java, how would you go about fertilizing a piece of wood necessarily? Or would you just have to fertilize and have that substrate in there and then it goes through the wood? How does that work?
You just put the all-in-one pumps in for your fertilizer.
Yeah,
in the water column.
All-in-one liquid pumps is that what you pump the fertilizer into. You don't need if you're doing just that, you don't need the substrate. It doesn't like travel up the water column. It's just that the plant is in that as substrate.
It takes its nutrients out of the water column instead of out of the substrate, basically.
Do you have any final comments, thoughts about anything that people might want to know about freshwater plants?
Not right now, dude.
No. Stay tuned for our next podcast. We're going to be talking about saltwater cleanup crews.
Hit that like button, subscribe, all that good stuff. Make this get big.